Do you love TV shows? We do too. Hello everyone, I'm Jeff.
And I'm Anna, and we're the hosts of We Judge a Show by Its Pilot, a podcast hosted by us, a married couple with an endless love for TV.
Whether you're searching for a new favorite series or ready to revisit an old classic, we're here to guide you through an infinite world of TV shows.
Each episode, we watch and discuss the pilot for shows, while also sharing personal stories that parallel the storyline.
So if you're tired of endlessly scrolling and not sure what to watch next, tune in and let us do the searching for you.
We Judge a Show by Its Pilot. New episodes every Tuesday and Friday, wherever you get your podcasts.
Your new favorite show is just one click away. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to our pod.
Hello. Happy Saturday night.
Happy Saturday. It's the day after Valentine's.
Happy Valentine's the next day.
Happy Valentine's the next day. So I don't know what. Oh, the Get Down. Duh. We talked about. We just went and saw Mamma Mia.
Yes.
And for the second time.
Yeah, we saw it on a cruise. Our
first time, and I'm gonna go ahead and say, equal professional, equal production. Like I will say, if you go on one of those big Royal Caribbean cruise ships and you go see a Broadway show, I mean, at least the two that we saw on a cruise ship were pretty high production.
Cruisers, show yourselves in the comments.
Oh yeah.
Cruise heads. Yeah, I mean, I will say I thought Mamma Mia was better than Grease, but I mean Grease was fine because I knew it, but I felt like this one, it was just as good as the one on Royal Caribbean.
And it was the same, and it was I don't know if it was I want to say it was the same woman that played Rosie, because we found out that the woman that was Donna's friend that got with the wilderness guy, adventure guy at the end.
One of the other potential
the one
husbands
that Julie Walter plays in the movie.
Yes.
We saw in the program that she also played the same role on Royal Caribbean, and I'm almost positive it was the same. Well, it was the same woman.
You're not going to believe me, but when she came out, I was like, I don't know if it was just reminding me of us seeing it on the cruise.
Yeah.
But I felt like it felt familiar. But again, it could just be because we've seen it twice.
They're all wearing blue and khaki.
And exactly. So
it's set in like 2000, so that's
it was
the
good.
fashion, yeah. And we are watching the movie tonight.
Yes, because I've never seen the whole thing.
And I've given it a lot of grief, but I haven't seen it in, what is this, 20? Yeah, I haven't seen it in like 15 years or something like that. So maybe my mind will change. I've grown up a lot, and maybe I was just having a bad day.
I don't know if I talked about this when we talked about it during the Get Down. Or
about your mom watching it?
Yeah. So, and again, watching it the other night, it was kind of funny because when she was talking about the dates, I don't know if she says something similar in the movie.
Yeah, I think she just does journal entries. I don't know if she does the actual dates.
And so
that would have cleared things up.
I think that's why my mom was just like, good gosh.
How do you not know?
Like, how do you not know? Or like, just whatever. So it was kind of funny to hear that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's cute.
But that was Mercedes. Good. Yeah. Oh, my mom.
So we are continuing February short-lived TV shows for the shortest month of the year. And we have a show that is from my young adult years. And this was actually when you first came up with this idea. I'm pretty sure you're the one that came up with this idea.
I did.
No, I did it because I did. No, I'm just kidding. No, you did. And
I'm good with the themes.
You are.
You're good with finding shows that fit the themes.
We're both two people. Give us a theme, we will thrive.
Yes.
We will thrive in a theme. Hey,
yes.
This should be the name of a store.
Okay. It could be our event planning company.
So this is when you came up with the idea for short-lived shows for February, and you said My So-Called Life, and I immediately thought of this show.
Oh, okay.
Because I was just like, man, this was like my So-Called Life, because it came out. So I'm going to be completely honest. There's probably going to be maybe like 2 people that listen to this episode that remember the show or watch this show.
You might be surprised, because I think the people that listen to podcasts are probably more of your generation than mine, because
that's true.
I'm going to admit that I had never even heard of this
Yeah.
show. And I actually like a bunch of the people that are
Yeah.
in it, but I didn't know that this was one of like the very first things they had ever done.
Yeah.
Or maybe one of the things they had ever done.
I mean, well, yeah, so we'll get into,
I had never heard of it.
once we get into the cast, it's pretty crazy who all, because I remember I was just like, I think I told you who was in it, or maybe I didn't, because I remember like you were like watching the credits, you're like, oh my god,
I knew.
oh my god,
I
oh
knew
my god,
one. I knew Hayden Christensen.
You just kept saying, you were just like, oh my god, that person, and I'm just like, yep. So yeah, Higher Ground was a show from 2000, which for some reason I thought it was older, but it just feels so long ago. I just assumed it was late 90s. So yeah, before we get into all of our stories and talking about all of this, Anna's going to do what she always does and give us some episode and series information.
All right, Higher Ground, the pilot was called Scot Free. Higher Ground was a teen drama series that premiered on the Fox Family Channel on January 14th, 2000. Is that Sarah's B-Day?
That's Sarah's B-Day.
Happy B-Day, Sarah. And ended on June 16th, 2000 after 1 season and 22 episodes. The series was created by Michael Braverman and Matthew Hastings. Hastings was fairly new to the industry, but went on to produce for shows such as Shadowhunters, The Originals, and The Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah.
Braverman was probably best known for creating the groundbreaking family drama Life Goes On. Oh, blah dee, oh, blah da, life goes on.
We'll do that show one day.
Okay.
That and Picket Fences.
And I know I can't sing, so don't come at me in the comments.
Also, copyright strike.
Yeah, sorry. Oh, will I get in trouble for that?
No.
The pilot was written by Braverman and directed by David Straighten. Higher Ground focuses on a group of troubled adolescents at Mount Horizon High School, a therapeutic boarding high school in the Pacific Northwest, as they navigate the aftermath of their troubled home lives.
That was the easiest way to sum up what the show is about.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of sums it up. And
Yeah.
I think like each person has like some sort of different
Yes.
story.
I'll get it.
Yeah.
I'll get into that in a little bit.
The cast includes Joe Lando as Peter Scarborough, director of Mount Horizon and a recovering addict.
And he was Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman.
Yeah. And I think he was like soap opera stuff too, maybe in his early
And
days.
I didn't realize that like Dr. Quinn ended, and then this was like his follow up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Hayden Christensen as Scott Behringer, the newest student at Horizon.
Anakin Skywalker.
Anakin.
His first thing.
Darth Vader. AJ Cook as the sarcastic Shelby Merrick, who I love
Criminal
from
Minds.
Criminal Minds.
J.J. Giroux. Agent Giroux.
Candace McClure as the level-headed Cat Cabot.
Probably.
Cabot. Giorgito Vargas Jr. as the tough Augie Ciceros. Megan Ori as the bubbly Juliet Wayborn. Kyle Downs as the witty Ezra Friedkin. Deborah Odell as Hannah Barnes, one of the other counselors. And Odell would actually leave the show after episode 5, and she was replaced by Anne-Marie DeLuise, who played Sophie Becker, and she made her a first appearance in episode 2, and then came back on as a main in episode 6. So a little flip-flopping of characters. Yeah. And although she's in the opening credits, Jewel State, who played the gloomy Daisy Lipinowski, she wouldn't appear until episode 5. That is kind of weird that they have these characters that don't even appear, but they're in the credits.
And what was really interesting is out of everyone in the young cast, she was the most established. So I wonder if they were like, she doesn't come in until episode 5, but we need to have her in the credits so people will be like, oh, I recognize her.
Yeah, maybe I'll watch it because of her. The series was one of the highest rated programs on Fox Family. It was praised by critics for its modern take on troubled youth and for the talented young cast, but fell victim to Fox Family being bought out by Disney and being rebranded as ABC Family. The series was canceled due to higher-ups at Disney.
I swear, you never yawn in real life, and then
I
as
know,
soon as we start recording,
I know it's like the weirdest thing. It just overcomes me.
I'm gonna be honest, it really cracks me up now.
I know, because it's like we've been watching TV.
We talk all the time.
We're in the kitchen working on prepping dinner, and I wasn't yawning.
Yeah.
But the higher ups at Disney wanted more lighthearted content on the channel. Thanks to syndication, full episodes have been put on YouTube. The series has a small but loyal cult following and is often cited as one of the best teen dramas of all time. You can currently watch the full series on Prime Video, Freevee, and Tubi.
Yeah, it's interesting because when ABC Family took over, they replaced Higher Ground with another short-lived TV show that was in syndication. That was Freaks and Geeks.
Oh, okay.
So, and I want to say ABC Family also played My So-Called Life, and that's where I first watched My So-Called Life, which we did earlier this month.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So when I put this down as one of the shows, because usually it's like we kind of come to an agreement. Usually like half the shows we're like, okay, let's make it shows that like we've never seen.
Okay.
Let's at least try to make it shows we've never seen. And then the other half is kind of like you kind of pick two and then I kind of pick two.
Yeah.
That's usually how we do it. Sometimes
Sometimes
I'll pick all 8. Sometimes you'll pick 3 or 4 and I'll pick 2. Or it always kind of, but we always try to make it at least like half of them, at least one of us hasn't seen the show, just so we can have like a fresh take on it.
Yeah, for sure.
So when I decided to do this show, I knew, I honestly knew what your reaction was going to be to it, because it is it's a high school show. It's very melodramatic. It's very
it's high school, but at least in the pilot there was no like real high school.
Right. I mean, they technically are attending a high school, but it's interesting because
like in the wilderness.
This episode is so, I mean, I get it now, but like I get it. It's funny because like I didn't notice these things before we started doing this podcast. I've noticed it on some shows that we've done, but like now I start to understand. I'm like, oh, that's why they were doing this in the pilot, because they were trying to set things up. And because I remember we were kind of, I mean, I'm sure we'll talk about it when I do the plot summary, because the plot summary is only 2 pages.
Oh my gosh.
I know. It's really easy when it's less than 90 minutes. We were, like, of course, we kind of made the jokes about like the really bad stunt doubles and the very kind of like overacting that some of the teens were doing. And it's really interesting watching it now. And I'm like, oh, they were trying to like I remember you asking me, because you just named all the cast. It's a big cast. I remember you asking me like, now we always refer to it as the Facts of Life ordeal. Like we always kind of say, oh, did they pull a Facts of Life? That's like our little inside joke.
Well, that was an
now.
Interesting note of doing that pilot was like, oh, I didn't realize like those were issues
they went from 8 to 4 overnight, or 8 to 3, and then
because they were trying to give them all a storyline, but they're in 22 minutes. There just isn't time.
And I remember you asking me like, did they do a Facts of Life, and everyone kind of got lost in the mix. And I remember telling you, I was like, no, they actually did a really good job of giving everyone their own, and you really kind of felt connected to all of them. I think maybe because it was 22 episodes, and I think that was just enough. For at least like the introduction to all these characters. But in the pilot, I feel like they were trying too hard to be like, to give everyone like a moment and be like, oh, like Candace McClure's character, like, oh, like she had some type of trauma. Let's really kind of butter that up. And that was kind of like, that was the reaction you had. You were like, yeah, that was a little overacting. I'm like, yeah, it was like, but it's just really interesting watching it now as more of an adult, because the last time I watched this show, I was living in Florida. So when I so I'll kind of go back and talk about when I first started watching the show, and then I'll ask you first. Let me ask you what you thought of it.
I'm gonna say I liked it for what it was. Obviously, I was older than you were when it came out. I was already working, living in Seattle, which is funny because I was in the Pacific Northwest. But, I don't know if I had known about it and watched it in 2000 when it came out, if it would have made me keep watching it, because I know you just said as we were prepping for this, like, oh, it was like a teen drama and you probably wouldn't have been interested, and that's not necessarily the case. I feel like if it was a compelling show, I might have watched it. So I don't know how I would have felt back in 2000.
Yeah.
Watching it now, I don't know if I would still watch it. Like, I just felt like it was okay.
Yeah.
But nothing like in that pilot left me like going, oh my God, I need to watch the next episode. So, I mean, it was a good storyline and a good and a different take on high school, and kind of that. I'm going to say like a really kind of crazy thing, but I'm going to assume some of these kids had money and like this was their parents' solution. Rather than go to like juvenile detention, they're going to send them to this like cabin in the woods to like get better and go to high school. So I'm imagining that this is not for poor kids. So it's kind of like a Beverly Hills 90210 mixed with My So-Called Life, the bad kids. And, well, it's like, not that they were bad. But
it's like, it's kind of like, it's one of those shows where it's like it really kind of spoke volumes in the sense that like every single time that there was an episode where one of the main characters' parents would come to the show, to the camp, or I keep saying the camp, to the high school. It
seemed like camp though.
It was like, it was like, and I'll talk about that in a second. It was like, oh, it comes down to home life. It comes down to the parents.
Yeah.
Like that's always what it was about. And these parents would come in and they would be in their suits and they'd be all like well behaved, kind of putting on a show for everyone. And then as soon as like no one was around, or as soon as like, and it was almost like every single time parents came to visit, it was that character's storyline to relapse. Like that was always like kind of what it ended up being.
Well, then that kind of goes towards my question, sort of just in general about the pilot. We'll talk about it, or why, I didn't watch it, or maybe why it didn't catch on, is like how much of that could keep happening. Like, I mean, before it got boring and then this high school wasn't working.
Well, it was really interesting because the way the show worked, I say they kept relapsing. There was really like one character that did that. When I look back, I have not watched all the episodes in a really long time.
But again, I mean,
But what I was about to get at was, it was, I think that was also like the way the show ended. It was like, oh, they ended it the way it should have ended. Like it was kind of like a natural ending. I think there was like maybe a little bit of a cliffhanger, but not really. So I agree with you. It's a lot like when I think about a lot of the high school shows that didn't last very long. You think about like My So-Called Life or Freaks and Geeks or even Square Pegs. It's like, okay, how much of this can you do? Like, and I think that's always going to be the issue with high school shows, because then you have shows like Riverdale and 90210 and all these high school shows that went on for a really long time, and there's some really good stuff, but then once it gets to a certain point, you're like, okay, like how long are these kids in high school for?
That, and like
it's like
how
8
much
seasons long,
and not to sound super depressing, but and especially with this one, with the pretense already started that they're here for a bad purpose. But I mean, we can easily talk about 90210. Like, how many times can you like do drugs or be sexually assaulted or like break up with someone? I mean, they stretched it out. I mean, it became very soap opera-ish.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, towards the last few years for sure. So
I think that's why the high school shows that don't last longer than one season, I think that's why those are always held so much more preciously, because they were able to contain it, and then they were able to be like, okay, and they all kind of ended the way they ended, love it or hate it the way they ended it, but you can kind of look back and be like, this is perfect. Like, this is perfect. Because, I mean, just thinking about the fact that Hayden Christensen could have possibly passed on playing Anakin Skywalker because season 2 got renewed, I can't imagine him ever doing that. But like, it was just the idea, because while they were filming this, while they were filming the end of season 1, he was reading for Anakin, and
Phantom Menace, right?
The second one.
Oh,
whichever
okay.
one that
yeah,
is.
yeah. He's the second one.
The god-awful one that I saw in theaters.
Yeah.
Attack of the Clones. There it is.
Yes, that's it.
And just thinking about that, I mean, like, that's insane. And then Jewel Staite, who she just can't catch a break with TV shows because right after this, she was on Firefly, which only lasted a season.
Yeah.
And then before that, she was on a show called Flash Forward, and that was Ben Foster's first show. Ryan Gosling was on that show.
Oh, wow.
And that only lasted a season. That has like a huge cult following. That's like,
massive.
I can't find copies of it anywhere. Only shitty versions on YouTube. But yeah, so it's interesting that like we kind of getting into this month, kind of watching these shows that, I mean, so far, I think only Togetherness is the only one that went on longer than a season. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
All the other ones only went on for a season. So, or Rags to Riches did two seasons. But,
Gotcha.
Yeah. So it's just interesting watching it now as an adult, because I haven't watched these. I mean, I last time I watched them, I was an adult, but I was in like my early mid-20s.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's just been really interesting to kind of watch these shows and kind of be like, kind of from an adult perspective, be like, oh, I get why the show didn't catch on. Because like when you're watching it at the time, or when you're watching it for the first time, it's in syndication and you love it so much, like, oh my God, how could this show get canceled? Like, the show's so great. But then you kind of rewatch it however many years later and you're like, oh, I get it now. You're just like, I get it now. Like,
then I'm going to talk again on something that we both personally have no idea what happens in boardrooms and meeting rooms and with executives. I'm wondering, like, how difficult of a time they had finding sponsors for a show like this
on Fox Family,
right,
on a cable show that's kind of geared towards
happiness
YA and happiness. And they were, I mean, you have the 31 Days of Christmas on Freeform. It's called Freeform now, but like,
yeah,
it's very, you know, they had their, I think like Pretty Little Liars maybe played on there, but it was like Life of an American Teenager. That was like, even though she was pregnant and stuff, like that was a very like wholesome-esque show.
That.
And Bunheads played on there, like all these very like kind of the original content, other than maybe a couple of things, were all very wholesome. And I think when it was Fox Family, because Fox has always been like the little on the edgy side, and I think this was kind of their like, let's make like an edgy PG version of teen stuff. And at this time in the late 90s, early 2000s, schools like this were all over the United States. Kids were being, I mean, kids were getting taken in the middle of the night by these schools. I mean, there's a whole documentary about it on Netflix. They're like, these kids were, you know, I'm not going to sit here and be like, they were innocent. They didn't do anything wrong. They were, you know, troubled kids, and they had troubled home lives. And the parents were kind of like, it was a really big kind of a place where you can just kind of dump your kids because you didn't want to deal with them anymore. And there's a pros and cons to that, but years and years later, you find out that these kids suffered major abuse, and they were sleep deprived, and they weren't allowed to go outside, and they were abused and in all different types of ways. And it was like, even when they were showing improvement, it was like, you're never going to leave, you're going to graduate from this place. And like,
I'm sure for them, they were the money.
Oh yeah, exactly.
So
I mean, you weren't going to these schools for free. I think with Mount Horizon, it's not a real place. I'm talking like it's a real place. I think with the school in Higher Ground, I think the reason why there's a kind of a mini storyline of like the school struggling for money is because I think there were a lot of like charity type cases, like Augie was, and Shelby was. So I mean, like they both came from really poor families. And it was like, you either can do this or go to jail. It was kind of like one of those things.
So that, I just wanted to throw that in because I have a feeling that was probably a bigger reason than it not being a good show or something interesting. Right. Because I think like it probably was interesting because it was new and it was different and very of the time. Mm-hmm. I just don't think that was of the subject matter that channel wanted.
That's always the interesting thing, because when we talked about My So-Called Life, we kind of compared that to 90210, because My So-Called Life felt very gritty, it felt very real, and then 90210 was like, it's just so interesting that like, it's like, oh, we can sell sex, but we can't sell drugs and alcohol. You know what I mean? Like, it's just so bizarre to me. Because I mean, like, I know, and I think it's also like when it's actual kids playing kids, I think that also kind of strikes people. It's also kind of like, oh, those kids actually look like they're in high school, you know. It's like, oh, it feels more real, I guess. I guess that's what I'm trying to say, because Claire Danes was like actually 15 when she was on there. And you watch these other shows, and I think like all the other cast of, I think maybe just Candace McClure was like 19 or something like that. The rest of them were like 17, 18, 19. But yeah, okay, so we probably can figure out why the show didn't pick up. We kind of gave our reasons. So I'll just give a little bit of history for the show for me, just to give you an idea, and everyone else, because I feel like when I talked about Rags to Riches, you were like, I get it now. You were like, I get why you hold this so close to you and why you love it so much. And so I feel like with this one, it's a little bit it's not as fun of a story.
Okay.
It's just not, well, with the Rags to Riches, it was like, it just kept popping into my life, and for random reasons. And it was sweet. I'm not saying this is like a sad story or anything. It has nothing to do with that. So when this show first came out, I always associate this show with going to my grandma's house, going to Penny's house.
Penny?
So,
okay.
Ninth grade was when, at the very beginning of ninth grade was when my grandpa died. And I was like August of my freshman year of high school, August of 99. August of 99.
Oh, okay.
It was like the very beginning of my freshman year. Gotcha. And so every Sunday, I would go to my grandma's house with my mom. And that was when my Aunt Trish and Uncle Don still lived in Baton Rouge. So my cousin Kristen would come sometimes, I think. And what we did, and what you do a lot at your grandparents' house, is the adults hang out in one room and the kids hang out in the other room.
But not upstairs.
No, we were never allowed upstairs. Well, no, after my grandpa died, he was the one that didn't want us to go upstairs.
Oh, okay.
I still didn't go upstairs, up those stairs until I was like 17 or something like that. I think I ran up there and ran back down one time as a dare. And so I always associate this show because it would come on Sunday nights. Or it would at least rerun on Sunday nights, and that's where I would always watch it. And I remember watching all of it, and then it playing like marathoning during the summer. You know, like when you're 14, 15, and especially back then before really internet took over, you didn't think about like, I wonder if the show got picked up. You know, you don't think about that when you're especially when you're a kid. I mean, you're just like, oh, this show's cool. So this show just kind of popped up in my life, and then it kind of like went away. And then I think they played it on syndication on another channel a couple times. And so I would just kind of like watch it here and there throughout high school. And then when I moved to Florida, I made friends with a girl at Hard Rock. Her name is Ann. I think we're still friends on Facebook. She may not have Facebook anymore. I actually have no idea. But she was the one, like, we were the same age, and we liked the same stuff, and we talked about the same, like, we were both adults that were way too old to be watching Degrassi. Like, we were those, like, we both had that in common. And then she was just like, do you remember a show called Higher Ground? I'm like, yes. You know, I was just like,
yes.
And you were like, we were both kind of like, because I think at this point, Criminal Minds had just started.
Oh, okay.
So it was like, I was like, she looks familiar. Because AJ Cook was also in Virgin Suicides. She was in Ripper Letter from Hell. Like, she was in a lot of stuff that I had seen. So, like, I knew who she was. Like, she never, like, left my brain. And I knew Anakin Skywalker was from Higher Ground. Like, I remembered that stuff. And Candace McClure was in a bunch of, like, made-for-TV movies. And I always kind of remembered everyone from that show. And we just, like, talked about it. And, like, she was like, oh, do you remember this episode? I'm like, yeah, you remember this episode? Like, we kind of talked about, we were the only ones that remembered Higher Ground. And then so where I lived in Florida, it was a big, like, I think I've talked about this before. It was a big, like, transient's the right word, transitional place where people would just kind of live there. It was a spring break summer place. And a lot of times people would kind of go there to make some money, and then they would leave. Like, and that was very common.
I don't think, like, you go to Destin to live the rest of your life. Not a lot of people.
Retire.
Yeah.
You can go to retire, or a snowbird. So she went, I think she went to, like, Memphis or Nashville or somewhere in Tennessee. And then she came back to visit, and she was like, hey, I have something for you. And I was like, oh, what is it? And she had bought, Higher Ground on DVD.
Aw.
But it was like buying it off of like ioffer.com where you get like the burnt DVDs.
Oh, okay. So it was
written,
like a
written in
legit one.
Sharpie, and Higher Ground disc 1 kind of thing. And
Episodes.
she was like, here, like, watch it, you know, like I'm giving it to you. And I'm just like, you know, and this was kind of during the era where like I couldn't really spend any money. Like I couldn't really go anywhere. Like I kind of was just always at home. And so I didn't have cable. So I was just kind of like, oh, well, I have an entire show to watch now. And so I watched it, and it was just like, I just was crying at the end of all the episodes. And I was just like, I got so invested in it. And then it ended after 22 episodes. And I'm like, the show doesn't have a season 2. You know, it's like one of those kind of moments where it's just like, it's kind of like the first time I binged Freaks and Geeks. I'm like, oh, there's an end to this. You know, I was just like, it's only 18 episodes. Well, this is 22, but Freaks and Geeks was 18.
Yeah.
And it was just a show that like, I don't think I ever watched it again after that, because when I was in Florida, like I kind of moved from place to place to place, and I kind of lost stuff through the mix. And so I only somehow kept the first disc of Higher Ground. Like somehow like the other ones got lost in the mix. And so I've watched the first 4 episodes of Higher Ground a lot. Just because I'm like, just something to watch. I didn't have cable for a really long time.
Hey,
so
man,
it was like,
it's what you did when you only had a few DVDs. You just watched them.
And that was why I invested in TV shows. That's why I got a whole chunk of them upstairs in our bonus room.
That's what I would do.
And I bought so many, including Criminal Minds. But yeah, so the show always kind of like, the show it's one of those shows. I have not watched the full show in such a long time, but like I know that there are certain episodes that are going to make me cry even now, because I just got so I get really, and I'm sure I've talked about this before. I get so easily invested. Like it does not take much for me to get really into a show, and it does not take much for me to get emotional when I watch something, because I always kind of like put myself in the situation. Even if it's something like really melodramatic or silly, I will still always like put myself there, or remember something that made me feel that way, or something that was like similar to me, and I will just start, you know, I'm a big tenderoni. I will just start blubbering. Okay, so talked about that. And so there's, with the first episode, it's really kind of hard to be like, you know, what was the time you ran through the woods running away from a police officer? You know, it's just kind of like, well, no, remember that one time? So it was a little tough. I think that's why I wanted to talk about my history with the show and why I love it so much, because I'm like, I can talk about that for a minute.
Okay.
But so my favorite episode of the show, the one that I will probably watch at some point soon once I figure out which episode it is. Juliet, who was my favorite character, she was like the bubbly, sweet one. She was my favorite character, and there is an episode where she falls into like a cavern type thing, and she gets trapped there, and that's where she like faces all of her demons. It was just one of those where I was like, oh wow, they really kind of like, that wasn't the part that made me cry. It was just the whole episode itself just got me really invested. And so it kind of got me thinking, like, we can definitely talk about times where we got lost, because that's ultimately what it's all about. She gets lost in the woods, and that's where she and most of this episode takes place in the forest, so it only makes sense. Maybe not lost in the woods, but can you think of a time where you got like really lost somewhere?
Yes. Well, first off, you know, we had the woods by my mom's house, but those woods weren't like deep. I mean, literally it was like I could walk through them in like 30 seconds. I mean, it was just crossing a path, but it was the woods. My being lost actually came in Seattle when I first moved there. And so this was before GPS. This was before I knew about things like MapQuest. I actually don't even think I had a cell phone. And if I had, it would have been like a little mini brick or a flip phone. So it didn't have GPS or anything like that on it. So I moved to Seattle Labor Day weekend of 1999, and this might have been in my first or second month, like October, November. and I'm actually thinking it was more in November after daylight savings time.
Okay.
So back to normal, sunsets early. And in Seattle, fall sunset starts happening at around 4:00. Like it gets dark fast.
Sounds awesome.
And oh yeah, I loved it. But I had decided, I had been there about 2 months, and I was like, I really need to go beyond my exit and my apartment complex and, the downtown. I'm going to get off my exit and I'm going to go past where I live.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm just going to keep going down the highway, and I'm going to just drive around to see what I find, see what other stores or restaurants or whatever is around where I live. Cause I just didn't know what was around. And so I started driving, and I started taking this turn and that turn, and I wasn't really paying attention to what I was doing. And I was near a lake, and it was very bustling.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I wasn't in like the desert or the
Right.
wilderness per se, but I had no freaking idea where I was. And it was dark,
Mm-hmm.
and I was so turned around that I really started panicking. And again, I could have easily have stopped and been like, where the hell am I?
Mm-hmm.
But my new to Seattle self was just like embarrassed. And I just was like, oh my God, like, I don't even know. That was sort of the other thing that was sort of sad, was I don't even know if I could have really told anyone where I lived.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I knew how to get to where I live because
Right.
I just kept driving there, and I knew where my apartment complex was, but I could not give anyone real directions. And it's kind of like when you go to a friend's house and you don't know exactly like the directions, you know how to get there, and maybe someone else is meeting you and they're like, okay, how do I get there? And I'm like, I don't know. I just got here. Like I know how to get here. But anyway, so that was probably the only time I was legitimately lost.
Mm-hmm.
I did not know where I was or how to get back to my apartment. I think I inevitably just kept driving a little bit until I saw like a major thoroughfare that was recognizable to me.
Gotcha.
And I think it took me a little while.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was probably, I think, maybe one of the only times. The only other time I can think about not so much being lost, but being sort of like, I don't know if trapped is the right word, or if this is a story you're looking for, so you can cut it if you want. But one time I landed in Moscow.
Moscow.
Not Moscow. Moscow. There's no cow in Moscow, Idaho.
Got it.
They always say that. And it was the winter, and I landed, and it had started snowing. And mind you, this airport is really small.
Mm-hmm.
And by really small, there are two it might be bigger now. I haven't been there in a while, but literally you walk into the airport, there are like two ticket counters and like one gate. It's the whole airport is probably the size of our house, if even that big. It's tiny. So we landed, and they were like, a storm is coming. Like, it is snowing. Good luck. I got my car rental. And literally by the time I got off the plane to my car, I felt like I was in a snow globe.
Oh my
like
God.
It was just coming down, just snow, snow, snow. I couldn't even see the road. Like, I could barely see like a hint of like the asphalt. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I should just stay here. But if I stay here, I'm just going to be trapped here.
Right.
And then there's nothing here, because it's not like they had restaurants or like anything for me to do at this airport. I just remember driving so slow, feeling trapped in this snowstorm. Like, if I was just like, please let me get to the major highway, because it was like a little tiny road.
Yeah.
Until the major highway. So those were probably about the two times that I felt like lost or trapped in a location. What about you?
Well, I have a really bad sense of direction. So being lost is kind of my life story.
Okay.
I'm really bad with directions. I'm really bad with finding my way unless I am like extremely familiar with the area. I know much like when we were in the area where I grew up, I know all the shortcuts. I know all the places to go, and that's different because it's so familiar. But yeah, when it comes to just like naturally trying to find my way, yeah, I'm not talented in that way, and you are definitely the navigator. So there are three that come to mind. None of them are long stories. There was one where, and this is all before, I mean, MapQuest existed, but it was like MapQuest, you had to type it in, print it out. And even then the directions weren't always right because it wasn't like the technology wasn't what it is now. And so the first one I'll tell is when the first time I went to Destin by myself when I was pre-moving there. Like I hadn't like officially moved there yet. I was just going to see my two friends that lived there. And I had printed out the directions and they were not correct. And when I got off of the interstate, I took a left instead of taking a right, which the right you're going towards the ocean. And left is you're going more into inland Florida, more into northwest Florida. And I started driving and I'm just like, okay, I don't know what happened. And because I remember taking the left and then it was like, okay, when you get to the end of this, then you take a right. And so I'm like, okay. You take a left. So I basically just drove in a circle and I didn't realize it. And I drove back into Alabama.
Oh no.
But I was in this weird like side road, back road type place, and I remember like walking in because I remember like driving back and it says you're now entering Baldwin County, Alabama. I'm like, well, I've gone the wrong way. And
whoops.
I basically just drove in it. Like I said, I basically just drove because I got off, took a left, then took another left, and so I basically just drove in a circle.
Yeah.
Or almost a circle. And so I'll go to this gas station, and I was just like, I remember walking in, and it was like I was low on gas, so I went and filled up my gas tank, and then I walked in, and I'm like, instead of saying, where's Destin, I'm like, where's the ocean? I don't know why I said that. I was 21. I was a kid.
Where's
but I mean,
the
like,
ocean?
Where's the ocean? The guy kind of looked at me, and I was like, how do I get to Destin? And he was just like, I don't know. And so I'm just like, okay. And so I think someone like overheard and he was like, okay, this is what you do. And he like gave me directions. And once again, he didn't like write it down or anything. I should have just gotten him to write it down. Like I said, I was 21. This was like my first time really traveling a long distance by myself. I put long distance in quotations. And yeah, so I eventually found my way, but I'll just never forget you were now entering Baldwin County, Alabama. And I actually said out loud, I was like, well, I'm going the wrong way.
Well, okay, so it's funny that you said, where is the ocean?
Mm-hmm.
Because I decided to look where I think I was.
Uh-huh.
And so I found my old apartment complex and I found like...
Did you drive to Canada?
No, I wasn't that far. I had taken it, and so I'm going to show you. So, like, my apartment was, like, right here, like, at this little fork. I took this highway all the way to the top of Lake Washington.
Oh, okay.
I had ended up on the other side of the lake in Bothell.
Oh, okay.
And so I had, like, never been there. And
Gotcha.
so I was just like, where the hell am I?
That is just all I'm seeing is green. All I'm seeing is State Park.
Yeah, it is like all just, and that's like the other thing. It's dark. There weren't a lot of lights. And I just remember, I think.
You're engulfed in all those trees. Yeah.
You're going to laugh is I saw the major interstate. It was 405. And so I was like, I know if I get on 405 and go back south, I can go back across Lake Washington and get back to 5. That's what I did.
Yeah.
I like got on 405, drove all the way down, took that across, and went back up I-5 North back to my apartment the way I knew how to get there.
Gotcha.
But it was only because I saw the interstate. And like, I was really, I mean, when you look at that, like I drove that whole loop.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I was just so lost. But I was like, I now know where Bothell is and Kirkland and all these other places. So that was my first couple of months in Seattle getting lost story. So.
Yeah. So I had gone to, this is right before I moved back to Louisiana from Florida. I had gone to Orlando with some of my friends, and a lot of them were kind of staying for like a longer trip. I just did one day at Disney, and then I was just like, I'm gonna go back home.
Yeah.
I'm over this. And we had rented 2 cars, and they were like, okay, well, can you, obviously I wanted to drive back home, so they were like, you're gonna return one of the cars. I was like, yeah. So I ended up driving back by myself. So this is Orlando to Destin, which isn't that bad of a drive. It's not that long of a drive. But Florida, even though Florida doesn't seem like a very vast, it's a I hate saying it like this. It's a long state. It's not known as like a wide state because you just have like
it's kind of both.
But I didn't realize that because on the map it doesn't.
Oh my God!
But on the map it doesn't look like much. But once you get past Panama, it's just like once you really get past Panama, it's just like it's crazy. So this is like the beginning of Jeepers Creepers. I'm like I'm like taking all these highways because. I didn't drive there. I rode there. So I kind of just paid attention to where we were going and stuff. And like I said, this is before iPhones, this is before maps. I didn't have anything printed out because I just didn't think about it. And so I started driving. I was like, okay, if I just drive north, I'll figure this out. So I was like, I'll figure this out. I end up kind of going to the wrong side of Florida.
We're to Jacksonville.
Well, no, I was kind of going towards that way, and I'm like, okay, obviously I took a wrong turn somewhere. So I went to a gas station and I bought a map of Florida.
Hey, that's what you did.
A road map of Florida, and then some guy was like, "Where are you trying to go?" And I was just like, "I'm trying to get back to Destin." He was just like, "Hey, man, the best thing you can do is wherever it says west, just." Take that. And I'm just like, you know what? That's a really good idea.
Yeah.
Because I didn't have any other way of, because I looked at the map and I'm like, yeah, this is, people translate this somehow. But I was just like, I don't.
Oh, I'm good with a map.
When someone told me, when I asked someone like where we were and stuff like that, I was just like trying to figure it out. And I was just like, I don't know where I am. So, I mean, like, how can I figure this map out? Obviously, I think now I would panic a little less and I'd be able to do it, but I don't have to worry about that now.
Well, and now this is like bringing back another unlocked memory that you always say that I do for you is, I didn't have a cell phone. I think that was the other thing. When I left New Orleans, I had a little mini brick phone and it was only 30 minutes a month, but it was tied to the area code in New Orleans. And so I gave it up and canceled that account. And when I moved to Seattle, I didn't have a phone. And I remember telling all my coworkers in the office, like that next weekend, that had happened to me. And they, we all would talk about what we did. I remember my regional manager, Michelle, shout out to Michelle.
What up?
She was like, you're going to get a phone right now.
Yeah.
She's like, I cannot believe you do not have a phone.
Wow.
And so, Thomson Reuters let us like expense part of our phone.
Nice.
So, I was able to do that.
Yeah.
But she was the one who was like, I cannot believe you do not have a phone. And that, you could have called one of us and we could have either come to help you or find you or whatever, talked you your way back. So that was the trip that inspired me to get my second cell phone.
Nice.
Yeah.
All right.
All
So
right.
I have one last getting lost story because I actually have one where I was lost in the woods.
Oh, okay.
So this was during my days of being a Cub Scout. So when I was for about 3 years, I was a Cub Scout.
Aww.
And never made it to boy. I was just a Cub, and or Eagle or whatever it is. It was Cub Scouts. So every summer we would have Boy Scout camp, and we would go, maybe it was like 2 weeks, or maybe it was a week, maybe it was 2 weeks, it was something like that. Our parents, like chaperones, would come with us and stuff like that. It wasn't like camp. It was just like kind of like a family thing. The family being kind of like the parents were just there. It was, I know for a fact it was just an excuse for our parents to go out in the woods and drink. So and the rest of us did our Cub Scout thing. So there was this, we were in somewhere in Louisiana, obviously somewhere probably in like central Louisiana.
I was gonna say Alexandria,
probably, because that's where we always went for stuff. And so there was this, we were surrounded by forest and stuff like that, and it was me and 2 of my friends. And if anyone who watches Smosh will get this reference, One of those friends was what we like to call a chosen, where he just thought he knew everything about everything, and perhaps if I let the leaves come out of my hand, it'll tell us which direction to go. Like one of those kind of kids. And I don't even remember his name, so I couldn't even tell you who he is. But we were walking in the woods, and it was one of those things where like we were a kid, we're dumb kids, and we were just talking, and we just kind of like didn't realize that we were walking so far, and we kind of walked, and we were just like, where are we? You know, one of those things where it was such a kid moment. And I was just like, well, let's just turn around. I was like, let's just turn around. Because I don't remember, like, taking turns or, like, climbing over anything.
Going through a fork.
Yeah, so I was just kind of like, let's just turn around and just go back the way we came. And, of course, my chosen friend was just like, no, hold on. And he took out, like, his compass and was like,
oh, God.
The camp is southwest, and we are, it was like one of those things. I'm just like, this kid's going to get us lost. But he just, like,
and murdered.
He was just like, no, we have to follow the compass. We're Cub Scouts. Like, we have to follow the compass. I'm like, this was the first time where my sense of direction, maybe this is where my sense of direction got all messed up. But I was like, it makes sense for us just to turn around. Maybe I was being a little chosen too. Maybe it just makes sense for us to turn around and just go the direction we came. It wasn't like we walked for like 12 miles. It was probably like a mile and a half or something like that. Because we were kids, you have all that energy. And so we follow his compass. And we are going through woods that I know we didn't go through. We're going through like bushes and branches, and we're not on like...
How many of you are there?
There's 3 of us.
Oh, okay.
And me and my friend are just like, okay, this kid has gotten us so lost, and he keeps doing his compass thing, and I'm just like, okay. Like at that point, it was like we kind of walked a little in the opposite direction of what he was saying. I was like, just let us do this for a second. And within like 2 minutes we found the trail, and we were just like, yeah. And then like we looked at one arrow and it was pointing that way, and I'm like, that is the way to camp. I was just like, and he kept trying to do the compassing. He's like, oh no, I was reading it wrong. I have such a clear memory. He's like walking behind me and my friend. He's like, oh no, I was reading it wrong. That's my fault. He was going out doing all that, and I'm just like, okay, you need to take the L for this. I appreciate you at least taking the L, but you don't have to. You got us lost. You were trying to be the Cub Scout. You were trying to look cool, and it didn't happen. We were kids. So that's always like anytime like we watch a Smosh video with the Chosen, I always think of him. Because he even like kind of
sounded
in
like
my mind, he talked like that because it was just
the Chosen.
That's just kind of how you talk when you're, a little bit of a nerd. Yeah, so those are my getting lost stories. All right, you want to get into the pilot summary?
Let's do it.
All right, it's only 2 pages. All right. Higher ground plot summary. All right, so every episode opens with a famous quote.
Okay.
This episode's quote is, "We are all in the gutter, but some of us look at the stars." Oscar Wilde. And I mean, just basically, we all have the same problems. We're all in the same boat. We're all living in the same earth. Just some of us strive for something better, brighter. Yeah. All right. Scott comes home to find his dad. That's Hayden Christensen. Scott comes home to find his dad and stepmom waiting for him with an intimidating-looking guy. Scott knows what is happening. He is about to be taken away to a rehab school. This is like we said earlier, this is fairly common in the 90s, early 2000s. I don't know the name of the documentary on Netflix, but if you really want to go through some depressing stuff, go watch that. Troubled teens would be taken away in the middle of the night and brought to these behavior modification schools. That was their like official title, until they were deemed cured. Scott attempts to escape, but is unsuccessful. And boy, does he try to escape a lot of times. I mean, I guess because he's going to school jail. I guess maybe that's the reason why. So meanwhile, Peter Scarborough, the director of Mount Horizon High School, is climbing a mountain, just casually climbing a mountain. It's just by the way, the episode opens and ends with him climbing a mountain.
Yeah, exactly.
So I guess this is just a metaphor. At the same time, Hannah Barnes, a teacher at Mount Horizon and leader of the Cliffhangers, is on a 10-day... I didn't realize it was 10 days until I rewatched this episode. 10-day quest in the woods with her students and another teacher. His name is Jeff. But this Jeff is probably the most worthless teacher I've ever seen in my life. I don't know who let this teacher on this quest. He is just tripping over stuff and getting in the way. I'm like, I understand it's like a plot device, but like... just couldn't they have just had someone who like knew what they were doing and also twisted their ankle? That can happen. It happened to Velda Plender in True Beverly Hills. We just watched it.
Oh, that was good.
While driving to the school with his parents and the officer, Scott attempts to, I don't know if this is like a teacher. I guess this is a teacher, but he was like presented as like a police guy, but he works at the school. Scott attempts to escape again while going to the bathroom, but once again, he is unsuccessful. Peter returns to Horizon on his super cool motorcycle. This guy just couldn't be cooler if he tried. Leather jacket. He is just opposite of being on the prairie on Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman. Yeah. There's no horse and carriage. This guy is... Oh, I guess he was the hot guy on Dr. Quinn, too. He arrives on his motorcycle just as Scott arrives. Peter meets Scott and his family. Scott shows an immediate disdain towards his stepmother, calling her a whore and a slut, which caught you off guard.
Yeah.
You were like, Jesus. And I'm like, oh, you're about to find out why.
Yeah.
Scott's dad insists that Scott never had an issue with him or his mother remarrying, and that this just began less than a year ago. Scott's father and stepmother leave. While on the quest, we get to see some of the dynamics within the group. Juliet, the newest member of the group, isn't a fan of being in the woods and is unable to shower, but Hannah reminds Juliet that it's just 10 days. And when she first arrived at Horizon, she would even go outside, reminding her of her improvements. Shelby is on a mission to find some psychedelic mushrooms in the woods. That part was actually kind of funny. She kept asking Ezra, like, what kind of mushrooms are these? What kind of mushrooms are these? Like, and he's just like, leave me alone. She tries to get help from Ezra while also constantly making fun of him. Jeff has noticed that Augie never reads the map and only relies on the compass. Here we go with the compass.
The dang compass.
Jeff thinks that Augie might have a learning disability because he refuses to prove to Jeff that he can read a map. Kat, the leader of the Cliffhangers, leads the group for most of the hike. Jeff was too distracted to notice a giant log, even though Augie clearly said "big step."
I know,
which
yes,
is code,
he did.
which is code for look out. And he falls and twists his ankle. Once again, I know this is a plot device. They build a human sling out of their backpacks. This is to show them how resourceful they are, and they did the same thing in True Beverly Hills. I'm just gonna keep bringing up True Beverly Hills. They build a human sling out of their backpacks to carry Jeff back to Horizon. While on their way back to school, Shelby and Ezra notice a bridge that crosses the river, which would save them hours of carrying Jeff. Hannah points out that there is a sign saying that the bridge is unsafe and is falling apart. After a little instigation from Shelby, Ezra tries to prove that the bridge is safe, but ends up falling into the river after leaning on a broken railing, which enter the stunt double, who's 45 years old.
I know, huge.
With an Ezra wig on. Hannah, Kat, and Augie jump into action. Kat gets ahead and manages to pull Ezra out of the water. She begins to have a panic attack while repeating, "Please don't let him die," showing she has some past trauma she hasn't completely dealt with. This was the part where you were like, all right, this is a little, and I was like, yeah, they're trying to show, this is what I mean by like, they're trying to show like all these kids have issues. Like they were that was like really what it felt like. I'm going to go ahead and say, I only have like 3 paragraphs left, so I can kind of interrupt for a second. They really tone it down in future episodes. Like it's a lot more of them being at the school. It's a lot more of their like personal goings on. Like I said, this was the pilot and they were like, we have all these cast members, we got to introduce all of them
and do something
because most of the episode focuses on Scott, so it's just like, because he's the new guy, and it also focuses on Peter. The Cliffhangers return to Jeff with the Cliffhangers return to camp with Jeff and Ezra in tow. Some of the others meet Scott, but he doesn't really interact with them. Scott's third attempt to escape ends up being successful due to him being able to outrun the counselors. Yeah, you were like, how did that counselor not see that coming? It was when he does like the fake football move and just keeps running.
Keeps going.
Scott manages to find the nearest town, breaks into cars and houses, hoping to find money, drugs, alcohol. I don't know what I guess he's just looking for something. Peter finally tracks down Scott in a house where no one is home. It looks like he is in a teenager's bedroom. Scott begins to have a meltdown when he starts having flashbacks. We only see glimpses, but it is implied that Scott was having a sexual relationship with his stepmother, but that Scott kept telling her no, making it non-consensual. So basically, he's not having a sexual relationship. Stepmom is sexually assaulting him.
Yeah.
But since it's a guy, it's more complicated. Scott starts to sob and keeps saying it's not my fault, and he also keeps saying don't tell my dad. He keeps saying that, and I think that's what he keeps. I think that's what has been making him. Peter doesn't know what he's talking about, but he obviously knows because we only see the flashes. Like he doesn't tell Peter about it. We just see the flashes in Scott's brain, and Peter can obviously tell that there is something very wrong, which they yeah, that whole storyline gets so messy towards the end of the season. So throughout the pilot, and this is a very kind of a side thing. Throughout the pilot, Peter is discussing the future of Horizon with the school's owner, Frank. Frank says they are out of money and the school is at risk of being shut down. Peter makes an offer to buy the school from Frank, but needs to figure some things out first. Then he goes back and climbs that mountain.
Oh,
He's
yeah.
like, Frank's like,
Let me climb a mountain.
Frank's like, Peter, you going back to that mountain? He's just like, hell yeah.
Yeah.
Hell yeah, I'm going back to that mountain.
I'm going to climb.
So the first few episodes are kind of all about like Peter trying to buy the school and having to kind of deal with people from his past that kind of led to, he has to like deal with his ex-wife. He has to deal with his father. Cause he was like a Wall Street guy before, like his character, before he, he became an addict because of being on Wall Street and stuff like that. But yeah, so that is the end of episode. I gave a very summarized version. It's 42 minutes, but I feel like I got it all.
Oh yeah.
I feel like I got it all.
That was, yeah.
I did a good job. I did that all from memory. So,
You've seen it.
So yeah, this is a show that like, what are you about to say?
No, I was going to say like, yes, watching it today, I don't know if I would keep watching it, but I think if I was a teen,
imagine 15-year-old me watching this being like,
I mean, I
what
think
happens next? Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah.
I don't know if when it came out, the
Probably
age I
not,
was,
yeah.
but yes, probably as a teen, and it was relatable. Yeah. So, I mean, it was good for what it was.
Right. I mean, and this is also kind of the show that, I mean, versus a lot of other teen shows, this is the first show that kind of introduced ecstasy, that kind of introduced all of these kind of new designer drugs that were kind of out from like the rave culture and stuff. And that was like ketamine was referenced, and I mean, mushrooms have always been around, but I mean, like, it kind of also kind of brought light to, there are a whole lot of other things other than alcohol and weed. You know, there are a lot of other dangerous, those are still cautionary things that that you don't want to abuse, but there's just so much more out there that, like, you know, I think they wanted to inform parents while also like entertaining kids. And I think that was where they kind of probably went a little overboard, because the show does get very dark as it continues. But yeah, so if you watch this show when you were my age, or if you watch the show at any point and you want to go and rewatch it, it's on Prime. It's on all of their other stuff. Freevee, and I think Tubi was the other one. Yeah. And Tubi and Freevee are free. And so and also if you just really want to like see Hayden Christensen and AJ Cook when they were really young. Oh yeah. Go and at least watch the first episode. I mean, like, yeah, it's I'm going to go ahead and say it. It is a very cheesy thing, but it's a teen show. They're all cheesy once you're not a teenager anymore. Going back and rewatching it, you're just like, it's just your nostalgia that makes you want to keep watching it. So yeah, I think that, God, we are just hitting that hour mark. We're getting so good at this.
I know.
All right. You think that about wraps this one up?
I do.
All right. Thanks for, I just skipped a sentence. Well, that about wraps up this episode. Thanks for tuning in. If you haven't already, go ahead and follow us on whichever platform you're listening to this podcast on. That way you'll be notified every time we publish a new episode. You can also follow us on Instagram at WeJudgePilotPod. We're also on Facebook. You can leave us a comment, suggest a show for us to watch, or leave emojis in the comments. What you got?
I have a few. I have the mountains and the climber.
Gotta have the mic.
Trees. Yeah. Water, or the wave for the river and stuff. I don't know if there's a rafting emoji. I think there is a raft. The school, the bathroom or the toilet because he tries to escape, the motorcycle, mushrooms, the pill, the map, the compass, the wood. There's like the log emoji.
There is no raft.
There is no raft. Okay.
There is a boat that looks like a kayak.
Okay, there you go.
A canoe.
And cars are the houses because he was trying to find it, and the bag of money because he's trying to find the money to buy the school. All right, well, we are going to head out, but we'll talk to you soon. Thanks for listening.